What's up, guys, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be going over counting Elixir and knowing your enemy's card rotation. So I think the things that are really important to keep track of throughout the game, and they're things that on the surface you don't necessarily know are important. So obviously, if you're able to count your Elixir, you're at an inherent advantage because you know when your opponent is able to punish, you know when you're able to punish. It's a thing that you can definitely use to your advantage, and the things I'm going to try to help you with today is keeping track of it and knowing it. And of course, this is something that becomes more like ingrained in your play style as you play more matches, and it's something that, but it is something that you can further along in this process if you focus on it. And then the other thing is knowing what cards your opponent has in their card rotation, and you don't need to know all 4 cards in their hand, but you do need to know, for example, this is why I'm going to use log bait, when your opponent has log in their hand, when your opponent is low on elixir, because decks like this like to play at low elixirs. Because okay, so let's think about it this way: if you have 4 elixir and your opponent has 3 elixir, a hog will probably do a lot of damage, because what are they going to defend with? A knight. Meanwhile, if your opponent has 5 elixir and you have 6 elixir and you play a hog, they have an inferno tower. So there's a big difference in playing a hog at low elixir and playing at high elixir, and knowing when you can take advantage of it. Obviously, if they have like a mini peck in hand and they're even, that would be a bad situation to play hog. But this is something that as the game goes on, you're able to keep track of, and this is something that I kind of want to teach you. So what we're going to do here, okay, I'll do ladder, it's whatever. So the thing is, I'm going to try to keep track of it during the match, and then I'm going to have, I'll show the elixir bar, and we'll do it this way, so I can kind of show you guys how I keep track of it and go through the process and everything. So right now we're obviously even. I did not mean to do that. Oh, that's okay. I didn't poison tower, but get rid of those. And obviously, if it's going like super fast throughout a game, then you're not able to keep complete track of it. And that's okay. The really important is just knowing when you're up or down. And here's another thing. So I know you just use log. So as soon as I have 6 elixir, I'm going to go in with hog, so the hog will tank for the goblin barrel. Like, this is a good time. So it's good to keep track. That, especially with decks like this where you don't just mindlessly go in with everything. I wasn't paying attention. So hog will go in, and he's going to have a really hard time defending it here because the hog is tanking for the goblin barrel, and the goblin's going to do a lot of damage. And I should notice he also has like a second counter, but at this point the tower's so low that it almost doesn't matter. And I would say at this point in the game I'm slightly behind just because I went on offense just now, and he got decent trades out of that, elixir wise, and now I have to defend. So if I wasn't behind before, now I am. I'm behind like 3 elixir right now. That's okay because I have a lot of damage, and I just got a positive, well, at least a decent trade on his musketeers there. A little bit late. And the other way that is kind of obvious is when you're at 10 elixir and just waiting during a game, if you play a troop first, you're up. If you play a troop second, you're down. And you can actually count the amount of elixir. So like at this point he kind of defended late, so I'm assuming I'm probably going to be up a little bit. Yeah, it seems like I'm up like 2 elixir right now. Yeah, that's fine. I'm not too worried about taking damage on this side, as long as I'm able to stop the majority of it. I'm okay with him splitting his damage. And as the game wears on, it doesn't matter as much. But like right now, he's still up 2 elixir. At least. And now I just need to defend. And so this is something that's probably a little bit easier to think of mentally during a game, more so than it is saying it out loud and like trying to do it. But as you can tell, and this is something you'll kind of notice if you watch me stream, is This is, so also keeping track of card rotation is something that allows you to predict, for instance, as well. So say your opponent has this would be a weird deck. But say they have Giant, Hog, and then Goblin Gang, and Minion Horde. So you know that they can only defend with 2 of their cards. Or maybe they have 2 spells. Yeah, and you don't have like a super value push for them to spell. Then you know that when they're playing troops, when they're defending your, say, like a Giant plus a Musketeer, they're not gonna rocket it. I mean, I guess they could, but that's kind of bad because it's just Musketeer. Let's say a Giant plus a Knight. That's a stupid push, but they won't rocket it. They won't log it. So that leaves them with 2 decisions. It leaves it with them with their Minion Horde and their Goblin Gang, and it kind of depends on how they like to play things. But especially if you just have a poison, then just poison the tower and it'll cover your Giant and kill whatever is in it. But if you have poison in this deck, this is all hypothetical, of course, but it's to prove a point. And then you start to understand what they want to use to defend certain things, and you understand when they have it, because typically you rotate it around the same time unless your opponent has a cycle deck or you have a cycle deck. And that's kind of the point of cycle decks, is to out-rotate their counters. And if you get these counters and you know when they're coming up, then you can preemptively counter them with logs and other things, and that helps a lot. So, and like I said, so to keep track of your elixir, obviously the more you play the game, if you know every single cost of every single troop like I do, then I have a pretty good feeling. Also, if you know interactions, like if I counter a Musketeer with skeletons, that's positive 3 elixir, and I'm most likely ahead after that, depending on what happened preceding and all that type of stuff. But the best way to count your elixir, and this happens 4 or 5 times a game typically, is when you're both waiting after someone's attacked, and you're both waiting to play a troop at the back at 10 elixir. So obviously you know at that point whether you're up or down, and that's something to take note of, because then you know whether you can push really hard or whether you need to defend and recoup the elixir, maybe take some damage, but defend effectively. And obviously if you defend effectively, you're going to come out ahead in elixir more often than not, because if you defend effectively, then you get positive elixir trades. So that's really good to note. And then let's play one more, and of course I hope I'm answering a lot of questions about this, but I think I'm doing a decent job of explaining it. And then now I'm going to focus, I'll do the same thing to where I'll try to say my elixir out loud, and then I'll show the bar. I'm going to watch the replay and like edit the bar in, and then you can see if I was right or wrong. But also it's important to keep track of their card rotation, so like knowing what they're going to defend with and that type of stuff. And it's kind of like a thing that you become used to the more you play this game and the more you focus on it, because this game isn't just play card after card. It's really a mind game, and the more you think about it, the more successful you'll be. It's better not to play mindlessly. This game is a lot more like chess than it is a first-person shooter. It's not about your macro as much. Alright, so that's off-center, you can tell by the shadow. So he's also playing spell bait. Oh, and the other thing is, when a card is played, they have to play 4 other cards before they get it back in their hand. That's like the obvious thing. So that's how you know when they're going to have certain cards up in their rotation. I'm going to distract her with Hog and then kill her with Skeleton Army. And then he's going to have to defend these skeletons, so they'll get damage. Alright, so I got a little bit of damage. So at this point in time, I know he has log up in hand, and that's okay. I'm going to play the goblins in the front, so maybe if he's slow, they'll get hits. Yep. Oh, no, they almost got a hit. He actually did get it out in time. But that's okay. Alright, so once again, he's playing Spellbait, and he's allowing me to not use log against his Goblin Barrel. So now I know with his Inferno Tower out of rotation, I can pre-log and I'll kill his units. See, that's my point. Like, he had to play Goblin Gang before he was able to play his Inferno Tower, because he hadn't used 4 cards yet. I'm not. This is kind of funny how it's actually working out like perfectly. That's why I'm playing Spellbait, because it helps when you're playing Spellbait. It helps so much if you understand card rotations. I'm gonna Inferno this because he doesn't have a Hog. Ooh, he actually threw it up top. I was trying to... That's my bad for not paying attention to the shadow as closely. Oh, but his log's out of hand, huh? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to Goblin Barrel and I'm going to poison. Yep. Good damage. Oh, so I knew his log's out of rotation, so his only choice to defend was his Goblin Gang. and that means I can kill them with poison. So that's why I made that decision. I've been focusing more on card rotation than Elixir. I can only say so much through the course of a match, but I have a sense of when I'm up or down in Elixir. I don't, and I mean I keep, if it's like really important to the game, I'll keep exact track, but just having a feel for it is really good. So this is far back, and it's more important versus keeping track of your Elixir count is more important, especially versus people who have like pumps and beatdown decks. It's less important versus or with control decks, because a lot of times with control decks, if you're facing another control deck, then you're gonna have a lot of these like weird trades to where it's not necessarily making sense, but you're both so good at defending that like that's why you just cycle minor poisons. Like if someone defends a minor with a knight, they're losing Elixir every single time, but if you're also playing control, you can't necessarily punish it unless you pay really good attention to their cycle and are able to counter it that way. So yeah, I think that's good. If you guys have any specific questions about this concept or these two concepts, or have any other questions, then feel free to ask. But I think just to quickly like TLDR it, to sum it all up, it's important to know Elixir count throughout the game, whether up or down. More so whether up or down, like am I up or down a little bit, a lot, or am I even? If you're behind a lot, know that you need to go into defense mode. Know that you're going to have to make positive Elixir trades on defense or his. You can't just play cards down. So there are certain times, like say if you're even or slightly ahead and your opponent is still like pushing because maybe they started a tank at the back. At that point, you can start to think about, well, unless they have like lightning, obviously you avoid stacking your troops, but you can think about building a push off of their push. But there are other times like when you're behind Elixir to where you just need to kill their push at any cost, take as little damage as possible, and try to survive, because if you survive then you're okay, because presumably you got damage in the push that you lost the Elixir lead in. If not, then you still just have to try to defend your best and get back on even terms, and that's where the like good placements come into play, because they allow you, proper placements allow you to get an Elixir lead. But I'm getting away from the whole point of a TLDR. So keeping track of your Elixir is good for knowing when to go in, when to defend, and if you can do that, the easiest way, like I said, other than actually counting troop interactions, is you get this baseline of where when there's a point in the game to where you're both getting to 10 Elixir and you play a card, then you know whether you're up or down at that point in the game. And people are kind of like, well, what if I play a card at 8 Elixir, then I can bait it out? Well, I mean, you're just kind of hurting yourself, because then you don't have as much time to build a push, and your troop's going to get to the bridge and it'll die before you're able to support it, or you'll have to overcommit and you're going to end up being down Elixir anyway. So I advise just playing a troops at like 9.5 Elixir so you don't leak. Oh, that's the other big thing. Please do not leak your Elixir, unless it's like a really weird situation to where you have skeletons and he has a musketeer that's about to cross a bridge and you want tower to help. Then that's okay to leak Elixir, because you're going to get a positive Elixir trade out of it. But please, please try not to leak your Elixir. Your Elixir is lost forever once you get to 10. And that's one of the things I have come up a lot when I'm coaching people. So just make sure that you're playing a card when you're at 9.5 Elixir, so you're not wasting Elixir. And so that's the thing, like you get this baseline throughout games when you're, whether you're up or down, and then you can keep track of troop interactions throughout the game to know whether you're up or down, whether you make good defenses and when to push, when to defend. Anyway, and then next off is keep track of your opponent's card rotations, especially their defensive troops, especially their cards that counter your offensive pushes, like Goblin Barrel versus Log. Keep track of when their log is used on offense or defense, know when it's coming up in 4 cards, and take advantage of that. Or when they use Inferno Tower, or whether you're cycling faster than them, whether you've played 4 cards and you're back to your win condition, or they've only played 2. That's really important, and it can be a really big thing. So I mean, if you're playing Spellbait, this should be your #1 concern, is knowing when your opponent has the counters to your log. I mean, when they have log in their hand, essentially. And of course, depending on the matchup, they may have arrows instead, but that's the premise, is to bait out their spells with your other troops, or make them use it on offense and then punish it. And that's a really big thing in a lot of decks. And these concepts apply to everything, but I just use Spellbait as an example because it was a little bit better to showcase, I suppose. And then also know what your opponent is trying to do on their pushes and save counters. That's another thing with troop management and your rotation. So say your opponent has graveyard and you really want to save your baby dragon or your knight to counter the graveyard. Well, if he has an Electro Wizard crossing the bridge from a defense, and you can log it because it's already taken some damage, or even if you have to take like 2 Electro Wiz shots to save that knight, in certain situations that is acceptable, because you can't afford to not have your knight to defend your graveyard, especially if it's your only graveyard counter. So there's certain situations to where you have to take a suboptimal defense in order to allow yourself to have the proper card in rotation. You can't just mindlessly make these decisions regarding what cards you use to counter certain things just because, oh, well, Knight counters Electro Wiz. You have to think about the grand scheme of things and what cards your opponent is using. So, obviously, win conditions, spells, those are things, and defensive units against your main push. These are the things that you really have to keep track of throughout a match. And I know it can be hard to do immediately, but it's what the best players in the game do, and it's how we know when to do the things that we do, like whether we preemptively spell things or whether we play differently over time because of the counters that we know our opponents has. And the final thing that I like to leave with you guys as a piece of advice is during a game, there are certain situations, this is especially important when you know you're down in Elixir. Like maybe you overcommitted on a push, and based off these previous facts, you know that you're down. Well, for a good example is if you do a graveyard push and your opponent counters with archers, and then you're spamming poison because you want to kill the archers, but then you don't realize you don't have enough elixir. You play the poison, and it kills the archers, which is nice, I guess. It's in your head, it's a -1 elixir trade, of course. But the thing that you have to really keep track of is these archers have already countered a graveyard, which is essentially a +2 elixir trade for your opponent. And then, so these archers have already paid for themselves and then some. And then you, after have already pushing, you end up accidentally playing a really late poison. And you should know, and this is something people are like, oh, why couldn't I defend after that graveyard? Well, it's because you played poison and you overcommitted. This is why you don't always poison early game. But that's beside the point. You should know you're behind elixir now, despite their archers being down, and you are now behind. And then say he also had a knight, and maybe you had like a tank or something, so he's still positive in elixir, and you still wasted your poison late. And that's why. So the number one takeaway from that situation is you need to defend first, or you don't want to poison there. Instead, you can wait for his troops to cross the bridge and then like Electro Wiz them, and then this creates a scenario to where his troops die, and you have a troop pushing that he has to take care of, and this balances out the elixir. But if you do this late poison, you only kill the archers, he still has a knight pushing. This is a situation to where if he has a graveyard, you may be screwed because you're down elixir and he's about the graveyard with the knight, depending on how much health it has. Or it could lead to a situation to where this knight is pushing into you and you should just let it do like 400 damage. Or this is the same thing with like minions in defense. If you know you're behind, sometimes you have to sacrifice tower health in order to recoup your losses, in order to get back even an elixir, because if you over defend, then you're going to be behind for the rest of the game, and there's probably no way that you're going to recover. So if you're down 3 elixir, and like say he has a golem and he's about to start at the back after like minions are coming to the tower, you shouldn't waste elixir and give him an even bigger lead. What you should do is you should just take some damage in that situation, and this is very subjective. Like you have to make the split decision, and in certain situations is better than others, but it's something to keep in your head. Like you should know in certain situations it's okay to take damage, it's okay to let these surviving defensive troops to do a little bit of damage in order to maintain elixir lead or to get back even in elixir. So I hope this wasn't too confusing. I know there's a lot of hypotheticals, but I don't know the best way to show it in video. Unfortunately, I'm not quite as good at that aspect as orange juice, for example, but I think my opinions are still helpful. Or not my opinions, my thoughts on the game, I guess. I mean, they're opinions, I guess, but they're true, so my facts. No, I'm just kidding. But thank you guys for watching. I hope you learned from this, and I will see you next time.